Hello, friends. It is good to be sitting back on the couch with you. I apologize in advance for whatever crazy lighting ends up happening because we have been having insane weather here, like storms, tornadoes, crazy, just out of nowhere. And currently, right now, the sky cannot decide if it's going to rain or not. I am here with yet another week in the books for The Artist's Way. I am having such a different experience with it this time. I can't, it's been causing me a little bit of an existential crisis. I'm so thankful for the morning pages this time around because it's really helping me sort through the ways in which my doubts about my journey, about myself as a creative, have kind of reared their head, particularly in this last week. I thought it was interesting at the end of week two, part of her questions that she asks you, have any of your blocked friends triggered doubts in you? And friends can be a loose term here. It can be just anyone in your life who is observing your journey and decides to have comments on it or decides to project their definitions of you and your identity onto and over who you may be defining yourself as, particularly as someone, in the artist way, you are on a journey to redefine yourself. And this isn't saying that we take the entire blueprint of who we are and throw it to the wind, and this is a complete ground up changing of who we are. Actually, no. Earlier in week two, she says it's not that you're changing any of your beliefs. It's not that your values are shifting, but we are being asked to examine them. And as we examine our values, as we examine our beliefs, inevitably, the people in our life are going to take notice, and that can have positive benefits and it can have negative benefits. I had an experience last week that I wrote about in my Substack, which I will link below if you'd like to go read that article specifically, because I'm not going to go into it too much here. But something happened that really shook me. It shook me in how I perceived myself versus how I was being perceived externally, in so much as it has to do with my creative journey. I did what I always do when I have a negative identity shattering experience happen to me. I write about it. I decided to process my thoughts about what was said to me in my morning pages. And then I realized as I was writing that I had something here that I felt like it needed to be shared and articulated for other people who inevitably I know are also having these experiences. Something about humanity is that we don't experience anything in a vacuum. If you are thinking something, someone else is also thinking that same thing. And I love that because it takes an otherwise isolating situation and it allows you to open it up to the wider world. This reflection is something that has a deeper meaning for my overall transformation as I have allowed the artist's way to undergo in my life. Okay, sorry, I had to lower the curtain there. The sun is like glaring in my eyeballs. If you're interested in reading that, you can go. It's in my Substack linked below. But it was essentially a retriggering of my doubts, and I absolutely do not think this person intended to say anything negative to me. It was said in an offhanded, passing, joking manner. Ironically, week two is about recovering your identity, and it's only natural undergoing this journey that you are going to experience threats to your identity. And I certainly had that happen many times over this past week, both internally and externally. By the end of week two, I have found it very freeing to arrive at this place where we are being given permission to self define, as it has roots in our creative identity, our individuality, in the unique ways that we show up for those things, and how that is overlapping with our journey through the artist way. Having done the artist way a few times, I realized that week two is actually one of my favorite weeks in the entire book because of its focus on identity. It also focuses on paying attention and how attention is a method of survival when you are emerging from your blocked creative identity. Something that she says in the middle of chapter two regarding this attention and survival is that a creative block often manifests itself as an addiction to fantasy. Rather than working or living in the now, we spin our wheels and we indulge in daydreams of could have, would have, should have. It's a great misconception that artists are living this aimless life of just coming and going at our fancy, and sitting down and painting or writing is such a personal indulgence. And really, I've come to understand that this instinct that we feel inside of ourselves to create, to show up at the easel, to show up with our paints, to show up at the typewriter, so to speak, to show up with pen and paper, insert your medium here, right? That instinct runs so deep that we can hardly understand it ourselves. It's just that it is there, and it is not quiet. It is not often peaceful. It demands to be reckoned with, it demands to be engaged with. And the artist way is one method of allowing yourself to unlearn cultural assumptions of what it means to be an artist, of what that might look like, and really free you from the learned identity of what it means to be an artist. And many times, this is where that connection between perception and your own ability to self identify kind of comes into conflict sometimes, because I can speak for myself that I have a lot of very rational, logical people in my immediate surroundings. They have their strengths, and that is equally important to the spinning and churning of this world that we live in. But that doesn't make my values, my gifts, my skills, it doesn't make that any less serious, any less valuable, and any less worthy of space in this context I find myself. But we fight that. We fight that doubt all the time, especially when that verbiage is reinforced or thrown back at us. I said this actually in my video last week, but if you consider yourself a creative, if you consider yourself an artist, it is very likely that this path, that this journey to arriving where you are today has brought you a lot of pain, challenge, struggle, internal conflict, external conflict. By the end of week 2, Julia Cameron really wants to have you understand that you are responsible for paying attention to what comes your way, and you are responsible for identifying in yourself who you truly are as it aligns with creativity. There are people in your life that do not fundamentally value that part of yourself. You are entitled to make changes. A soft life requires hard boundaries. I don't remember who said that. That's a quote from someone. If you know who said that, please pop it in the comments. But living a life that is attuned to a deep-seated set of values takes a lot of work. And we want validation for that work. I think on a certain level, there's something inherent about being an artist and needing a witness to that art. But we are by no means meant to be in a toxic relationship with that dynamic. And so week 2 is really setting the seeds for allowing us to continue our creative journey free of a learned identity and breezing through the day to day without being present of the incredible magic that is in the now. And so, this section on paying attention, again, reinforcing that idea of attention equals survival equals healing. And when you can pay attention to the influences around you in nature or in your children or whatever it is that you have access to, there is so much beauty and inspiration to be found in those things that allows you to better conceptualize your pain. She uses the example of May Sarton, who wrote the book called The Journal of Solitude. If you have not read this book, I highly recommend it. I picked it up a few years ago after doing The Artist Way the first time, and I have so fallen in love with May Sarton's writing. She was a queer author who wrote a lot about, you know what? She reminds me of Mary Oliver, except if Mary Oliver was purely a novelist. So Mary Oliver's ability to synthesize nature and the beauty of our physical reality with metaphysical truths is what May Sarton does in her novels. And many of her books are told in a journal format, but Julia Cameron uses her as an example of what paying attention can do to your healing journey. She uses May's relationship that was coming to an end and how painful that was. Felt like a bloodletting, about like being shot in the heart almost. She came home to observe the light bouncing off of her chrysanthemum flowers, and she says, I was stopped by the threshold of my study by a ray on a Korean chrysanthemum, lighting it up like a spotlight. Deep red petals and Chinese yellow center. Seeing it was like getting a transfusion of light. And this idea of transfusion being exactly what she needed in terms of the wound of the end of her relationship was, it's her response to this transfusion of light that shows the reader that she is aware of the possibility of healing. And the reward for attention is always healing. More than anything else, attention is an act of connection. Connecting one thing to another allows us to move beyond the pain or move beyond the wounds that we all inevitably hold. And it's such a good reminder as we move through our day to day, and especially as we continue to move through the artist way, that those moments of pain, the moments where we feel lost, inevitably the moments where we feel like our identity is being threatened, or our personhood is not being received by those we love and care about, is that we can turn our attention to what's in front of us. We can turn our attention to nature, to love, to whatever is inspiring you in the moment. Julia Cameron reminds us that filling our well intentionally and often is how we recharge our creative batteries. And I thought, I don't know, I love week 2. I think it's such a profound week. There's so much here. There's so much to glean from. I feel like my morning pages are always very strong on week 2. I just felt like there was more of this like download of understanding in week 2 than there was last week. I'm excited for week 3, but I know what's coming. I know that week 4 contains the reading deprivation, and as a avid voracious reader, somebody who posts about books on YouTube and Book Talk, I am dreading that week, but I'm going to take my own advice and the advice of Julia Cameron and just turn my attention back to the now before getting too ahead of myself. So if you're here doing the artist way, I've had a couple of you pop in my comments from last week's video and just kind of share your thoughts about your own journey restarting the artist way and how you're hoping that it gives your creative journey that transfusion of inspiration and light. So let me know if you've had any major insights this past week, if you feel like sharing. I have yet to do my week 2 artist date, so I am taking myself to the Milwaukee Art Museum tonight. Every April, they do this phenomenal show that's called Art in Bloom, and the museum partners with local florists and floral artists to create pieces of floral artwork that mirror or represent a specific art piece. So each florist is either able to choose or they are given an art piece that they are supposed to use as inspiration for their creations. And it's something that I look forward to every single year. And so I got a ticket and I'm going to head up there and just fill my well, as Julia Cameron says. I always like to take a journal and just like make notes of what I see. I will be taking tons of photos because there is just something so pleasant about observing someone else's genius, especially when it comes to like tangible, tactile art. So I'm going to end this vlog with just some clips of some of the beauty that I saw at the museum tonight, and I hope you enjoy. But make sure to do your artist date if you are doing the artist way. Take care of your time, give yourself the time needed to explore your artistic reality. So, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.